Right. I believe we are live. Let's just make very sure of that. There we go. Sup, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to each and every one of you to the Friday stream. It is, of course, 12 o'clock, as is customary on this channel. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday at 12 o'clock we go live, although we did not go live yesterday because I went to the doctor's. I don't know what happened, but ever since moving to Cape Town, I have these allergies that just kick my bottom pretty much every single year. Around seasonal changes is when it happens. Abaddon, how you doing, sir? Wheel Guy, how you doing? Rudolph, how you doing? Christine, how are you? The Good Shepherd, how you doing, sir? Every single year. And it's just, yeah, it's terrible. So yeah, I had to go to the doctors, and the doctors ultimately had to rinse out my ears because it was just wax buildup to the wazoo, thanks to the allergies. And then after that, it felt so disorienting. But I was only home at like 1:45, so it was way too late to do a live stream anyways. So we're live today. It's actually good that we waited because there's a lot that needs to be discussed today. There's a lot that we have to go through. South Africa, I see someone in chat said South Africa is the longest running circus in the world, and that's probably not wrong. I'm not going to lie to you. That's probably not wrong. So-called refugee, how you doing? Drippy Duppy, how you doing? Eighth, how you doing? Or Off, how you doing? I'm very happy to be here with all of you, and I'm very glad that all of you have showed up. Just before we went live, I received some information from the Truth Report. Stuff that we have to talk about, stuff that we have already spoken about, but it would appear that the government has forged ahead with their asinine policies, and so now is the time for us to actually start looking into this seriously. Fundamentally, this is something that is going to impact every single one of you. And I realize that there's a lot of you that might go, but I'm not a podcaster. I'm not a YouTuber. I'm just a guy that watches, or a girl that watches YouTube, or I'm just someone that posts on X. I don't really understand why this has anything to do with me. The fact of the matter is that legislation is very difficult to get in the door. Right, so normally what governments will do is they may have a plan, like a 5 or a 10-year plan for a specific piece of legislation. But it's very difficult to get that legislation to pass. So what often happens is they'll introduce the legislation as a very lean or a far leaner proposal. And then once the legislation has been placed, now they can just sort of go ahead and add on to it. So then they'll tack on all the things that they originally wanted to do. And as is the sort of idea with this newest piece of legislation that is being discussed, what this will effectively do is it will create a new board within ICASA or within some other government department. And that board will now oversee podcasting in South Africa. Now, of course, what does podcasting mean in South Africa? I don't know. Just to be very clear, when I still made video game content and I made videos about gaming, I was called a YouTuber because I was a YouTuber. I made YouTube videos. I wasn't a podcaster. I had a live stream over on Twitch where I would live stream, and there I would be called a streamer, but I wasn't called a podcaster because a podcast is a very specific thing. But in South Africa, like the first video I ever made about South Africa was about 15 minutes long. And I had so many comments saying, amazing podcast, please do more of this. And I was like, wait, podcast? This isn't a podcast. This is just a video. But it seems like in South Africa, the sort of broad language is just any video that you put online qualifies as a podcast. That creates a serious problem for this piece of legislation. Because if this piece of legislation passes, it would mean that any video that you produce, even if it is just 3 minutes long, and that you upload to the internet, makes you technically a podcaster. And if you are a podcaster, there are some things that you need to know. Now, when you go through the actual sort of discussions, because they just had a round table, And as you can see here, Seasway was there at this roundtable. They were speaking to some content creators. They were speaking to some industry experts, although these are not industry experts. They're just people who happen to have been appointed in those various departments. And a lot of this actually doesn't sound too bad when you really listen to it. So, for example, one of the key things that they believe should come out of this is, after a full day of discussions, the committee heard that while guardrails are key, self-regulation of those within the podcast sector might be the preferred way to go. And you might be listening to this and saying, wait, but this just means that, you'll be able to self-regulate. You'll be able to decide for yourself what you can and cannot speak about. Well, remember that the guardrails is the thing that you need to be focused on here. So if we scroll down a little bit, we get to the real meat and potatoes of this. The Director General of the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, Nonkubela Diani, not sure how to pronounce any of the other names in the middle of the Jordan Diani, said they have published a data and cloud policy to enable SMMEs to help avoid misinformation and disinformation. This is important. We are making other interventions, working with the regulator ICASA in terms of addressing the issue of data costs. If we're going to talk about zero rating data, these are issues we have to put in some type of regulation. We hear that people are talking about how they don't want overregulation. A regulation is not trying to stifle, it is not policing. Certainly there are going to be guardrails. So exactly what is it that they're planning to do? Well, first and foremost, if you want to be a podcaster in South Africa, they're suggesting that all podcasters must register with ICASA for a podcasting license. This means that you will now be viewed by ICASA as a broadcaster. This is actually one of the things that they warned about. Some of the people that were at this roundtable said the problem with this is the broadcasting rules in South Africa are massive. If you're, for example, SABC or MTN or CakeNet, the amount of regulations that you have to adhere to in order to be called a broadcaster, you would need actual lawyers. Most content creators don't have the money for the lawyers required in order to ensure that you fulfill all of the necessary requirements in order to receive your license. Even if those licensing fees and the licenses themselves are sort of streamlined for streamers, in other words, there isn't that much regulation, the guardrails in this and the use of misinformation and disinformation tells me everything that I need to know. The plan is, if I go to ICASA and I want to register now as a podcaster, because I need to be able to do that in order to make YouTube videos, ICASA will look at my content and they can decide whether or not I'm allowed to even have that license. Once I have that license, there will be a provision against misinformation and disinformation contingent on the fact that my license is only valid provided that I do not spread misinformation and disinformation. Who decides what is the misinformation and disinformation? For example, the ANC holds tight to the idea that it is misinformation to suggest that South Africa has race laws, even though South Africa obviously has race laws. The ANC further suggests that it is misinformation to suggest that white people experience any sort of oppression here in South Africa, even though white people obviously experience oppression here in South Africa. So, in other words, if I were to make a video calling out expropriation without compensation, I might be guilty of misinformation, because according to the government, no compensation is still compensation. Therefore, if I use the words without compensation, I would be a peddler of misinformation, meaning I would lose my license, and I would also probably be on the block for lawsuits that ICASA and the government could now bring against me. So effectively, this would allow the government to blanket only approve podcasters that speak the right messages. So what is it that the government is trying to achieve here? Well, remember what we spoke about last week during our live stream. Actually, it was on Tuesday. During our live stream on Tuesday, I explained to you why the ANC had their march on Saturday. I explained to you why the ANC is so desperate to try and invent this idea that they are acting on behalf of the people. Governments require authority. There has to be some kind of authority. Now, in a normal country, Charmaine, thank you so much for 2 months of loyal membership. I truly appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, thank you, thank you. In ordinary countries where you have, a normal government that only seeks or only rules based on the election results, the authenticity and the authorization of that government comes from the fact that they receive the votes that place them in power. But what do you do when the votes that you receive and the actions that you take on the global stage are no longer in sync with one another? The ANC is no longer a majority party in the country. In fact, the ANC's majority is completely eradicated. And if we look at all of the polling, it suggests that the ANC's majority will now be eradicated even more to just over 30%, maybe 32, 33% at the best of times. This means that the ANC is a minority party in the country, meaning that all foreign actions that the government takes is no longer with the express permission of the people that they govern. So now the ANC requires authority. And what better way of getting authority than banning all of the voices that don't agree with you? If there is anyone that doesn't agree with our stance against America, or our stance for Iran, or our stance in Gaza, you just remove that license. And now those voices can no longer speak out. What this means is the government finally has their control back. Because for a long time, both the National Party, the apartheid government, as well as the ANC, utilized media control as a way to control the narratives. By controlling the media, they were able to shape the ideas and the way in which South Africans think. Then the internet comes around, and suddenly there's information everywhere. This would effectively give the government back all of that information under the guise of freedom of expression. So in other words, these podcasters that are speaking in South Africa now, they're all on board with what we're saying, showing you that free speech, the public is behind us. But every single podcaster that you will see on the air after this will be someone that decided to bend the knee to government, that accepted that there are certain things that they can speak about, certain things that they cannot speak about, and ultimately what you will get in terms of the news will be a very whitewashed, information sort of segment. You'll only get what the government thinks you're allowed to see. Anything else will just be gone. So there is currently, and there is a link to this in the description down below, there is a policy group called freesa.org.za, and this group basically puts together these massive petitions. And then they also have lawyers and people behind them that can take these petitions to government and eventually take these petitions to court in order to challenge the legitimacy and the constitutionality of certain laws. And so ultimately, you can just go, click on the link there, make your way down and put your name, surname, email address, mobile phone, everything, because they need all of this in order to show who you are, who you're listening to, and so on and so forth. So if you wouldn't mind doing this, because you are ultimately doing this for yourself, this is the ANC's version of the digital wall that exists in China. In China, they just banned anyone else from being able to say anything in their country that the government doesn't approve of. Here in South Africa, they're trying the communist way of, no, look, we're just trying to protect the country against disinformation and misinformation. That's why we have to ban this free speech, because this free speech is obviously really bad. This will have incredibly bad consequences. And that's not to say that some regulation in South Africa isn't important. I think right now, one of the biggest problems that a lot of content creators have is we, for example, don't have an actual tax designation. If you're a content creator in South Africa, there's no designation for how you pay taxes. And the problem is all content creators pay for everything themselves, from the camera, the lights, the screens, the computers, the software. Everything is paid for from your own pocket. You also have to pay for the electricity that your setup uses. You have to pay for the data and the internet that you use as a result of this. And all of these are things that content creators are struggling with because you can't really go to SARS and say, well, I need to deduct all of these from my monthly incomes because these are things that I pay for, because SARS just sees it as, well, you're just a one-man show, right? And so it's a nightmare. So in that sense, regulation would actually be really good to designate content creators as a specific taxable entity, and it is a job that you can sort of go to the banks, because this is the other problem. If you want to go to the bank and get anything done at the bank, content creator is not a legitimate income. So in order to get any sort of loan or any sort of thing, it's a lot of hoops. It's not impossible, but it's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through, because you don't get a paycheck every single month, right? Your money can differ vastly from one month to the next. This month you can make $3,000. Next month you can make $800, dependent on where in the cycle you are and what your long-term plans are. So it fluctuates violently from one month to the next, and so it becomes quite difficult to really do anything in this country. So in that sense, regulation would actually be relatively good. The problem is that you can look at this government and just know that it's not going to be good forever and for everyone. This is their attempt. Because remember, the ANC fundamentally blame Afrikaners, AfriForum, Solidarity, and content creators, podcasters, for the problems that South Africa is currently in. The ANC doesn't believe that President Trump have eyes and that President Trump can just look at what the ANC is doing and go, whoa, that's not right. The ANC believes that President Trump only did what he did because some people lied about what the ANC is up to here in South Africa. Now, of course, no one is lying about what the ANC is up to. It's just that the ANC would prefer it if no one actually said what they were doing here in South Africa. So if you care about free speech, if you care about what podcasters do in this country, please hit the link in the description down below. Go over there, sign up to this petition, and help us at least try to fight this the best way we can. Because right now, I don't see a world in which this doesn't become law. You have the ANC, the EFF, and the MK that would back this law 100%. And with how the DA has been acting in the last year, they might actually back this as well, because it seems like the PA, the DA are just mouthpieces for whatever the ANC thinks is a good idea. So, we may actually just end up with about 80% of the parliament going, yep, let's get all free speech out of this country, because we would rather just people don't know what the hell is going on. So please, do yourselves a favor, go vote on that, or at least put your name down so that we can hopefully fight this nonsense. I beg of you. Anyways, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the stream. I wanted to get that out of the way before we get into the actual topics for the day, because, this is something that influences me. It influences my job, and I think it influences all of us, because I'm also someone that listens to podcasts. And ultimately, what will happen as a result of this is most of your podcasters will have to flee the country. Right? Most of your podcasters will be forced to flee the country, because what else is there to do? So I think it's incredibly important that you understand this, and that will create its own sets of problems, right? Because a lot of podcasters will most likely flee to America, and there they will set up shop. But now remember, you're in America. You don't get any news out of South Africa unless it is completely watered down and sanitized. As a result of this, because right now, if a podcaster goes and lives in America just because they like the weather or whatever, they can still make content about South Africa because it's possible to see what's happening in South Africa. But if that law passes and the regulations become fact, now suddenly you're living in America. You're no longer in South Africa. You don't know what's happening on the ground. And so all of the news that you get is the sanitized version of the news. So even your favorite podcasters will not be able to give you the actual news because, well, they don't know what it is. No one knows what it is except you guys living here on the ground suffering with this problem. So yeah, I would argue, don't think, oh, but there's other ways of dealing with this. This is the way we have to deal with it. We have to fight this and stop this. Jaguar, thank you so much for the 70 Rand donation, dude. Really appreciate you. Thank you. I always wonder, how would they even enforce it? In my opinion, it's almost impossible. There's a workaround if the UK can't do it with age checks. How can South Africa even imagine to pull this off? So what normally is the plan with these things, Jaguar, is self-regulation. So the government doesn't have to go after every single podcaster. The government just needs to pick one. So let's say, for example, the government decides to go after Truth Report with this new law. Truth Report said something that the government didn't agree with, and so the government charges it with disinformation and brings the court cases and whatever, and basically bankrupts the Truth Report. What ends up happening as a result of that, every other content creator in the country sees that and goes, "Wait, but I don't have billionaire backing. I can't afford to fight the government in court. So I'll police what I say now." Right? So I'll stop saying some of the more problematic things. And then maybe the government goes after another guy, and that reinforces it even more. And so slowly but surely, people just start to fall in line because they don't want to get into trouble. And so, no, a VPN would not solve this problem because fundamentally, the ANC would still have the ability to see what you're saying. So in China, the VPN works because it allows you to get over the security controls. Whereas here, the VPN would, sure, you'd just be broadcasting from some other country. But remember, you can broadcast right here from South Africa. They're not blocking the internet. They're just saying that if you don't have a license, you can't do a podcast. And so you'd still be guilty either way because you are still living here in South Africa, even though, you're broadcasting technically not from South Africa because you're using a VPN. So in this, VPN wouldn't actually solve the fundamental problem. Unless, of course, the government decided to fully block internet access to people who aren't registered, which that would be a nightmare, right? That would be a serious nightmare. Fundamentally, there's a lot of problems here, and this is definitely not something that we should be doing or something that we should allow to do. And it's incumbent upon us as people, as citizens of this country, to fight these things as long and as hard as we possibly can, because I don't think that this is constitutional, and I think the government is ultimately hoping that no one actually challenges this in court. Because if it was to go to court, the government would lose that court battle, and so the government is hoping to police their own language to the point where no one actually gets this idea that, oh, we should go to court. And this is where people like Free SA comes in, because they're making it clear to everyone what the government is ultimately trying to achieve here, rather than what the government says it wants to achieve. Because as I've said to you guys before, if you want to know what your government wants, don't listen to what they say. Look at the results of the policies that they enact. That's all you need to do. The government will always give you some whitewashed, sanitized version of what they're trying to achieve, right? So in South Africa, they'll say, oh, transformation. But look at what the policies achieve. The policies has not achieved transformation. And so now you have to ask yourself, well, why are you guys doing it still if it's not actually achieving what you say it should be achieving? Because if genuinely you want a transformation, you would look at the policies and go, well, guys, these policies are really not leading to transformation. So now you have to accept transformation was never the goal. There is another goal. And I think a large part of that is self-enrichment. But I think there is a darker side to why the government wants BEE and wants EE and wants AA. The government ultimately is trying to follow the Chinese model in their own little broken way, where every company in South Africa ultimately becomes a de facto extension of the state. So every single company in South Africa operates with at least 30% of state ownership. And therefore, now the state can effectively drive whatever future they want, because all the companies answer to them. That is, by the way, I think it was Rob Hersoff that actually made this point when speaking about billionaires and why so many of our businesses in South Africa don't speak out about the stuff that the government is doing. And when you actually look at who owns a lot of the business in South Africa, you will find that the government owns shares in almost all of the businesses in South Africa. That's a problem, right? And so that's why no one is speaking out, because they understand their livelihoods is dependent on the government not being upset with them. So I do think there's some tough roads ahead that we're gonna have to look at. But on to why you're all here. And I hate to say this, but there's something so sweet and almost delicious about the consequences of one's actions coming to bite you in the behind. There's something so beautiful about that. The ANC have been warned. They have been warned time and time again that this war that they're fighting with the Americans isn't going to go well for them. The ANC has tried to hide behind this idea that they're a sovereign nation and that they can do whatever they want as a sovereign nation. This is the worst way to think about anything. All sovereignty means is that you are free to do whatever you want. It does not mean that you are free from the consequences of what you do. Sovereignty does not guarantee freedom from consequences. This is the same argument that you oftentimes get from women who are pro-abortion. They'll say, "My body, my choice," and it's like, "But hold on, you're starting a little bit late with this choice thing, right? Because your body, your choice started when you decided to have sex. That's where it started. You're not looking for free choice. You're looking for freedom from consequences. When you had unprotected sex, the child is the consequence of your own actions. You wanting to terminate the child is you wanting to run away from the consequences of your own actions. So this has nothing to do with free choice. You had your free choice. You made that decision. Now you're paying for it, right? And this is the same argument that the Marxists and the terrorists here in South Africa are consistently utilizing. It's the same argument that a lot of the lefties around the world are utilizing when they continuously demand that diplomacy needs to come back and America and Israel has to stop the war in Iran immediately because Iran is a sovereign nation. And you sort of think to yourself, but hold on, being a sovereign nation does not give you the right to fund terrorist organizations around the world. Being a sovereign nation does not give you the right to consistently bomb and send missiles into another country. You can't fund a terrorist organization to carry out an attack on another sovereign nation, as well as fund Hezbollah to repeatedly attack Israel. And then when Israel finally responds to the source of all of the problems, now you want to go, we're a sovereign nation. What do you think you're doing? It's like, yeah, you were free to fund these terrorist organizations. But now you're also free to suffer the consequences of funding these terrorist organizations. It's the exact argument that I have about the war in Gaza. Because people often ask me, so are you okay with what Israel did in Gaza? And my answer is immediately the following. No one forced Hamas to attack Israel on October the 7th. No one forced them to do that. They chose to do that. Argument that I often get against that is, but it was a false flag. The Israelis knew that Hamas was going to attack them and they let them do it because that gave Israel the right to then attack Gaza. Okay, cool. Let's say I accept that. I say, yes, absolutely. Israel knew and they allowed it to happen. But Israel still didn't force Hamas to do it. Hamas still did it, right? Like, the Zimbabwe border is totally open. I could take a tank and just drive into Zimbabwe and start attacking it. But I'm not doing that. Right? Like, I'm not doing, even though the border is, I'm not attacking Zimbabwe. Now, in that same way, Hamas could just not have attacked Israel. Hamas attacked Israel, and Israel retaliated. And Hamas paid the price. Now, 2 years later, everyone wants to cry, oh, but what did Israel? No, Hamas decided to start this. You can't then, when it goes badly for you, turn around and say, well, this is unfair. They're so much stronger than us. You should have thought about that before you started the trouble. Like, if you knew that these guys were stronger than you and they were most likely going to win that war, you should not have started it. This would be like me walking up to Mike Tyson, punching him in the mouth, and then as soon as he starts pummeling me to the ground when he was in his heyday, he would probably beat the crap out of me even now, but in his prime, and then suddenly I turn to everyone and say, this is so unfair. This is so unfair. Like, he's not allowed to do this, right? No, you started that fight. No one forced you to start the fight. You started the fight. Now you're paying the price for the consequences of your actions. It's as simple as that. There's nothing else to this. So fundamentally, the South African government, the ANC, decides we're going to start this war with America. We're going to back every single one of America's enemies. And those of you who think that the ANC is merely standing on principle, I want to take you back to early into President Trump's presidency. Since the war between Russia and Ukraine broke out, the ANC has fervently backed Russia and attacked Ukraine. In fact, in, I believe, 2023 or 2022, President Zelensky actually requested the invitation to come to South Africa. And the South African government, the ANC, denied President Zelensky. The ANC was willing to break the international law to allow President Putin to come to South Africa, even though there's an arrest warrant out for him, because that's their friend, right? It was President Putin that ultimately said, you know what, I just won't go. It's fine. I just won't go. So fundamentally, this is established. The ANC did not allow Zelensky to come. The ANC was on the side of Russia the whole time. President Trump gets into office, and President Trump turns somewhat against Ukraine. Suddenly, President Trump is like, wait a second, Ukraine is taking a lot of advantages that we in America just don't agree with. Less than a week later, South Africa issues an invitation to President Zelensky. I remember this because at the time I said on my live stream, and this was before I even covered politics, I said to my stream, it's like we're actively trying to upset the Americans. When America was all for Ukraine, Russia bad, we were Russia amazing, Ukraine bad. Then the second the Americans say, well, actually, maybe Ukraine also bad, we go, oh, Ukraine good. Ukraine is a buddy of ours, right? Zelensky, old buddy, old pal. And say, wait, why are you just so blatantly going against the Americans? And this, of course, doesn't include the fact that MTN has just been, so if you look at this, the US is currently blocking MTN from accessing about 2.3 billion rands investment into Iran under the threat of sanction. Ramaphosa sat as the chairman of MTN at the time that these deals in Iran was made. So there's some serious crap going on with MTN there. There's some serious allegations against the ANC for funding, or at least allowing funding to flow from South Africa into Hamas, into Hezbollah, most likely training exercises that took place here in South Africa with the knowledge of the ANC. All of these are allegations that are out there at the moment, right? We have the infamous ship that docked at Simonstown that most likely loaded or offloaded weapons for the Russians. So the ANC has had a long history of picking battles with the United States at the expense of South Africa. And I've warned, since this started, I've warned that at some point, the world is going to be asked to make a choice. America is going to go to the world and it's going to say, it's us or it's them. Now, when President Trump and the Americans decided to place tariffs on South African goods and ultimately stop most of the trade going out of South Africa to America because the tariffs just makes it almost impossible to compete. It was the ANC and the DA that touted, oh, we'll just replace it with Europe and we'll replace it with all of these other countries in the world. President Trump just put pressure on Emmanuel Macron and the French to disinvite President Cyril Ramaphosa from the G7 meetings. Now, it's important to understand the G7 summit is open to the top 7 countries in the world. South Africa is not one of those. We should just make that super clear. South Africa has pretty much always been included as a sort of sympathy because, Nelson Mandela was a terrorist and then he was not a terrorist, but he was actually a terrorist and he did some terrorist stuff, but then he became the president and we all had to pretend like he wasn't the president that he actually was, the terrorist that he actually was. And so because black people in Africa are incapable of actually running a successful country, South Africa was included as a sympathy. But it was always just a sympathy. But it did give South Africa some legitimacy and some relevancy because South Africa would be part of the conversations. They would be there and they would be able to make trade deals and see the direction that the world is going in. The disinvitation of Ramaphosa to the G7 summit says to me that America is starting to tell other countries in the world, it's us or them. You either side with us or you side with South Africa. And guess what? If you're any country in the world and it is a choice between America and South Africa, you're not siding with the useless President Cyril Ramaphosa and his ever more useless government, the ANC. Because they cannot offer you what the US can offer you. They have systematically, for the last 30 years, destroyed this country, and they have put their own people into poverty. They have wasted every cent of aid that they have ever been given. They have wasted every single investment that has ever been made into South Africa. They have proven themselves incapable of running a spaza shop. And that would actually be one hell of a feat since none of them have ever even opened their own spaza shop. The only people that have ever received any sort of success in the ANC are people who did it through cadre deployment in positions where they had no actual reason to do anything. Just sort of white people did all of the business decisions and they just made all of the money. Because that's literally what BEE cadership is. You get signed into a board of directors. The board of directors are all white, mostly from other countries. They make the decisions that make the money, and you get 30% of the profits. Congratulations, go on with your thing. Now we can do business with the government. That's Cyril Ramaphosa's entire history. His entire portfolio is white people made him rich. End of discussion. Now again, and it's always important here in South Africa that I say this, that doesn't mean that there aren't black people who actually created their own businesses and are doing incredibly well. There are. But they're the enemy of the ANC as well. The ANC doesn't like the black guys that are doing it on their own. Because that takes legitimacy away from the ANC. The ANC is supposed to be the kingmaker. We are the ones that give you your freedom. If you go and do it yourself, you're a problem. Right? This is what the ANC did during the apartheid era. Anyone who did their own business and started to make a success of it, the ANC would either kill them or burn down their businesses. Because we'll decide who gets to play and who doesn't. You don't get to do it on your own. So that's sort of the choice that you have. Why would anyone go with South Africa? And I think that this is going to expand dramatically. Because as you will see, there is a giant move to the right currently happening in Europe. The European Parliament. Now, Europe has been the most lefty of leftist places in the world for a long time. Europe is this continent that just continuously sinks money into Africa, even though Africa has proven that if you give them $5, they'll go $400 into debt. Like, you can't give them money because they'll just waste it and then put their own people even further into debt. But Europe just continuously signs the checks. Here's 5 billion euro. There's 10 billion euro. Here's another, billion euro. You waste it. We'll just keep signing the checks. But there's been a move in Europe, and it's happened slowly. Now, I'm not fully happy with the move, just to be super clear. I actually would prefer Europe become nationalists again. I would prefer the EU breakup. I would prefer that Europe once again become a collection of countries that work together rather than this conglomerate globalist nonsense that is the EU. I don't think that will ever actually happen because the nationalist movement that we're seeing out of Europe is a European nationalist movement, not a nationalist movement. So, the Germans aren't thinking of themselves as Germans. They're thinking of themselves as Europeans. So sadly, I have to accept the fact that I'm probably stuck for at least the next 20 years with the European Union. That being said, they just passed a very controversial bill. 2 years ago, this would have been unthinkable. But this effectively allows all European countries to deport all migrants back to other countries, not even to the countries that they came from. They can just dump these migrants in other third world countries close to where they came from. And you're like, well, good luck. Go live in Syria now because Iraq is a hellhole or whatever. They can just send them back. If you don't have a right to be in Europe, you don't have a right, and we can just deport you. That is pretty big. Then you have, for example, the European Union sort of suggesting tax cuts, which is insane. But this is a different story that I don't think we'll talk about it today. But it's sort of the European Union knows that they have to get away from green energy, but they're still a little scared of actually getting away from green energy, but they know they have to. So they'll probably do that at some point. But you have, for example, a month ago, the European Union accepted the trade deal with America wholesale, basically removing all tariffs from American goods. America can now send almost all of their goods into Europe without tariffs whatsoever, without any sort of pricing. This suggests to you that Europe is moving to the right. It's slow, and it's probably not going to happen overnight, but it is happening. Fundamentally, what this means is that at some point, Trump is going to be able to tell the Europeans, it's us or it's South Africa. Make your choice. We will not do business with you if you're doing business with South Africa. And the Europeans will just go, fine, South Africa, you're cut off. More importantly, if you look at, for example, where is she? Did I remove her? Where? I think it's on my page. Hold up. If you look at this lady, she's from the AFD. Now, Alice Weidel, or Weidel, if you thought, right, that the AFD was right-wing before, you have no idea. Alice Weidel is right-wing. She is hardcore right-wing. Very much anti-migrants. Very much anti-socialism, anti-the green energy nonsense. Like Alice Weidel she takes no prisoners. If Alice Weidel gets in charge of Germany, which now looks more possible than ever before, Alice Weidel will join a growing movement within Europe of right-wing governments taking power. Marine Le Pen's own party is starting to look as if they could actually also take power. I can't remember what her name is now, what her party's name is now. But if Marine Le Pen's party gets power in France, it effectively creates this block in Europe of France, Italy, Germany, Poland, Hungary, all of these countries that will no longer accept African inferiority. And they will most likely demand that Africa either fix their crap and join the rest of the world in doing business, or Africa should just go the way of the dodo bird. Because these people want to fix their own countries. They're not that interested in fixing the world through geoeconomics. They don't buy into the geoeconomic myth. They're geopolitical realpolitik adherents. So they're not going to continuously just sink money into the endless black pit that is Africa. They're going to say, look, Africa, you have to fix your crap. And there's no reason why Africa can't fix their crap. We've done this experiment before. South Africa, there's no reason why South Africa shouldn't be the second most powerful country in the world. Zero reason. On every single metric, South Africa has everything America has. The only thing we're missing is people. We don't have 300, almost 400 million people. But we could have that if the South African economy was managed well and run well. We could allow literally immigration from all over the world. And guess what? We would be flooded by people from Europe, people from Asia, people from America flooding into South Africa in order to make South Africa great. And it could happen because we have everything here, right? We have everything here. We don't need the rest of the world for 90% of everything. If you want to build a smartphone, we probably have everything you need to build a smartphone right here. We don't even have to worry about supply chains and massive supply chains all over the world. We have the rare earth minerals. We have the aluminium. We have lithium. I believe we have some. I don't know how much we have, though. I should actually check that. But I don't know how much lithium we have. But then again, you can get lithium from seawater or salt water, and we're surrounded by oceans. So we could get lithium that way if needs be. We have copper, we have gold, we have silicon, we have some of the highest grade silicon in the world. We have everything you need to build a cell phone right here without getting anything from any other country in the world. South Africa should be one of the most powerful nations on earth, and yet it is not. Why isn't it? Because we have the ANC that doesn't know what the hell they're doing. Because they're too busy blaming white people for all of their problems rather than owning up and saying, look, guys, we might be the reason for this. And I will end this discussion before I come to what you guys think on this. If you cannot take responsibility for your own mistakes, you will never fix those mistakes. It's as simple as that. And it is time for Africa to stop blaming the past for mistakes that are made now. There isn't a single failure of current day South Africa that is the result of apartheid. Every single problem that current day South Africa struggles with is a result of decisions that was made by the ANC. And it is up to the people of South Africa to start taking responsibility for those mistakes and saying, look, we were the ones who made these mistakes. Only we are the ones that can fix it. But instead, that's not how it works in Africa, which is just beyond, it beggars belief. I want to show you guys this. Like, it actually blows my mind, the way that freedom fighters think about the world. Down a little bit. Man, I tweet way too much. Here we go. So here is the way freedom fighters think about the world. In Namibia, the law is very clear. 51% must be owned by locals. We don't care who you are. Comply or pack up. Finish. Starlink this, Starlink that. Tell Elon Musk that it's very simple. Whether his is to spy on us or not, that's not the bone of contention. It's the 51% finish. Remind me again, how important is Namibia as a country? Remind me economically, what exactly does Namibia matter? South Africa doesn't have a great military, but we could probably take Namibia in like at least a month. This is what freedom fighters celebrate. The very policies that are keeping them poor are the things that they're celebrating. It's like, no, you will give us 51%. Who are you? Who are you to demand other people's hard work? You've done nothing for this. You didn't create the satellites. You didn't create the infrastructure. You have done nothing. And then you have the guile to demand 51% of a company is owned by locals that didn't build the company in the first place. And then you wonder, why are we poor? You're poor because you're stupid. It's as simple as that. You are making your own stupid decisions. And you're asking the rest of the world to somehow take the blame for the stupid decisions that you're making. It beggars belief. Like, genuinely beggars belief. But their governance is are radicalizing. Too stupid to understand. It's their own fault. I don't think so. It is stupidity, but I think it's more than stupidity. I think it's being ideologically captured. Like, I know for a fact that the ANC and the Marxists aren't stupid, because the way in which they're playing the game suggests that they're actually quite intelligent with how they do it. The problem is that the rules by which they're playing the game will always lead to disaster. They will never have, if they follow the plan that they have right now, it will never lead to success. It physically is impossible for it to lead to success. And so that suggests something else. The ideology is what's stupid, not the people following it. In fact, there's a famous quote that says Marxism is so stupid that only a highly educated professor at university could possibly believe in it. You have to think about that. Ordinary people listen to Marxist theory and go, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. And in fact, that has been it's been the peasants and the workers that have rejected communism throughout history. Because ordinary people, when you tell them we're going to take these people's money and we're going to give it to you, ordinary people go, but what happens when these people finally run out of money? Right? A normal person can think for themselves and go, that doesn't sound like a long-term solution to the problem. But when you're highly educated, now suddenly you start coming up with all of these scenarios in which, no, we can perpetually, endlessly just siphon money off of the top because of, if you really think about how money is created, if you take 2 billion from this billionaire, he somehow magically will just get another 3 billion because of dividends and derivatives. And, if you understand fractional banking, then it will actually make sense, because their own education has allowed them to lose track of reality. And I think ultimately it is important to understand that there are plenty of relatively smart people in South Africa who are caught up in an ideology that they themselves can't see how stupid this ideology is. And so they're doubling down on the ideals of this ideology in the hope that it will just eventually fix things. That doesn't mean all of them, because I do actually think that there are a lot of evil people in South Africa who full well know. Like, for example, I don't think Cyril Ramaphosa truly believes that BEE will enrich the black people of South Africa. I think Cyril Ramaphosa knows for a fact that their policy will just always lead to poor black people. And I think he wants it that way. Because for Cyril Ramaphosa, control is far more important than black people prospering. And if you can keep people poor, and you can convince people that we are the only ones that can, and that's one of the things that the ANC is currently trying to do. They're desperately trying to convince their voting base that we are under attack by America and the imperialist forces of the white people around the world. And unless you vote for us, the white people will conquer you again. Listen to the rhetoric that Ramaphosa is throwing about. Ramaphosa speaks about how evil European scientists abducted black people and did all manner of experiments on them in Europe. Well, that's not entirely how it happened, but it paints the picture. And that's all he needs. He needs his voting base to believe the white people will conquer you again, and then they will use you as slaves again. Never mind the fact that it was Europeans that ended the slave trade. Right? It was Europeans that ended the slave trade. The British Empire went into bankruptcy in order to stop the Arab nations and their slave trade. After they had already solved the slave trade of Europe, they started to fight the slave trade of the Arab lands. It was the West that stopped that, not the Arabs, not the Africans. In fact, a lot of African kingdoms were built exclusively on the idea of trading their own people as slaves. So it's important to understand these things. But again, it's about drumming up that last bit of support. And we are luckily seeing it backfire. It's no longer actually working. When you look at the ratio to which they're able to convince their own people, it's the word apartheid is starting to lose. It's losing its muster. A lot of black people now have the ability to look and go, really? I don't know. You guys keep blaming apartheid, but all I see is you. So I don't know if I believe that it's apartheid anymore. And now this is what I believe. You're seeing the ANC doing it far more. In the past, all that was necessary was one speech. The president had to give one speech where he blames apartheid, and all of the freedom fighters would be like, yeah, screw those white people. They should all die or whatever. Now they're doing it every single speech. And it was Adolf Hitler that said, for a lie to succeed, you just need to say it often enough and loud enough. If you say it often enough and loud enough, you'll eventually convince people that it is true. And I believe that that's exactly what the ANC is desperately trying to do. And in desperation, that's usually when they make fundamental mistakes. So I expect to see some serious mistakes. Well, we've already seen a bunch of serious missteps geopolitically. And I think it's going to get a lot worse in the near term. Going to get a lot worse. African kingdoms didn't sell their own people. They expanded further inwards and sold their tribal enemies. Napoleon, some of them, yes, but there were actually African kingdoms that sold their own people as well. Like some of the tribes that were considered lower, they just took their own people and sold them into slavery as well. So you are correct. I would say probably, let's say, 70 to 80% of all of the slaves they sold would have been other tribes. But there is evidence that they even took their own tribesmen and started selling them as well. Basically, and this isn't just them. The Europeans did the same thing. The Romans, to some extent, did the same thing with their own criminals. So when money is involved, there's almost never any sort of limitations, right? People will do anything for money, even sell their mother and father if that is what they need to do. Black middle class Gen X and Gen Z South Africans have been waking up to this for years now. I do want to believe that there are a number of black young people, and even some of the older generation, that are at least starting to look at the world around them and saying, this doesn't seem normal. The things that you guys are saying, that's not what I witness. But what is troubling is when you look at the polling and you see that the most racist black people in South Africa are the younger generations, not the older generations. So that's also troubling. So I think there are a lot of young people that are waking up to the lies of the ANC, but I think there's also a lot of black young people who are buying into the lies of the EFF and MK. Refused because it made his family wealthy. Did we address the G7? The determining we did address the G7. I want to hear what do you guys think of the G7? What are your opinions on the G7? One problem in Africa is all the decisions made are old, very old. They became rich just after the struggle ended as well, so they do not understand technology or the modern world. Rain, you're definitely not wrong. You're definitely not wrong. Prophet, so I understand that the G7 generally speaking, I'm also not a fan of the G7, but at the same time, it's more about South Africa being disinvited from the G7, right? SA doesn't qualify to be in the G7, true. We add FOL, we should not be there, true. Some countries did sell people in debt and so on. The amazing thing was Europe abolishing the slave trade worldwide. The UK only stopped paying for that only in the 2010s. The empire fought against it. True. Sorry, bud. I'm glad SA was excluded. No, Prophet, you don't have to apologize. I will say this as a South African. And now I'm truly, genuinely just speaking as a normal South African. I'm not speaking for anyone. I'm speaking for myself. For years now, I have been waiting for the world to take action against this government. For years now, I have seen the evil of this government. I have seen how Europe and America pays this government billions of dollars and billions of euros every single year, and how this government actively calls Europe and America evil empires and imperialists. I have witnessed the destruction of my own country and a government propped up by foreign financial investment. And one of the things that have driven me absolutely insane is that the West continuously funds this government. Because make no mistake, the money that you in the West give to South Africa goes directly to painting over the incompetence of this government. So I have been praying for the West to go, we're done here. Good luck. Because I believe that it is the only way that the South African people finally wake up and say, well, we've had enough. Because it's not going bad enough yet here in South Africa. A lot of people still have food to eat. A lot of people still have electricity. A lot of people can still go out and get a beer or something on the weekends and maybe have a braai. And so they don't really care. They'll just sort of chug along. So from my own perspective, nothing makes me happier than the world finally telling the ANC, no thanks. I want to see more of that. I want to see South Africa completely excluded from America, from Europe, from international trade policies. I want to see what this government does when it is up to them to try and fix this country. When they can no longer rely on free money from other countries. I want to see how they crumble. Because that is what will fix this country. I don't want you guys to continue to prop us up with money that actually just enslaves the rest of us and only really helps the ANC. So, excluding South Africa from the G7, good. South Africa shouldn't even be part of the G20, and I'm glad that President Trump has decided, no thanks. You guys aren't welcome. And I hope that the rest of the world will continue to do this to South Africa, because we have no right to sit. There are plenty of countries far better than us, even here in Africa, that deserve a spot at the G20 far more than South Africa. Because the ANC can only really boast that they are the most advanced economy on Africa because of the apartheid government. The ANC did not build South Africa into the most advanced economy in Africa. In fact, since they've taken over, they have eradicated the economy of South Africa. And the only reason South Africa is still the most advanced country in Africa is because the rest of Africa are so bloody incompetent. But you are starting to see offshoots. You're starting to see countries like Kenya, countries like Nigeria. They're starting to take power. They're starting to grow. They're starting to open their markets. They're starting to say, hey, we might be able to compete. And if one of those countries were to wake up tomorrow and say, look, free market, let's go, South Africa will no longer be the most advanced country in Africa. Because name a single thing that the ANC has built. I'll wait. Name the thing that the ANC has done that has taken South Africa forward. You can't. Because the only thing that the ANC has done was 1994. And they had every single opportunity to make this country the greatest country that has ever existed. And instead of doing that, they said, no, we'll just destroy it. We'll just destroy it. We'll do our own thing. And you'll see how good we are at it. So now, if you're living in another country, I can tell you that at least I, as a South African, I don't want you to help because you're not helping us. What you're doing is you're giving the cocaine addict more cocaine. We need you to cut off the supply. It's going to be painful. It's going to hurt, sure. But we desperately need you to cut off the supply. I'm in love with the cocoa. Yeah, pretty much. No, I don't know how many people I spoke for there. I see a lot of people say they agree. And I think a lot of South Africans feel the same. And look, it's not as if I want people in South Africa to suffer. But at some point, we also have to accept you voted for this. So if anyone wants to tell me, how dare you, do you know how many people will suffer? Do you know how many people, rely on that money? You voted for this. No one forced this upon you. In the same way that I told you, Hamas attacked first. You voted for this. I'm sorry, but I do not feel any remorse when I see African villages or African townships and people suffering. I don't feel remorse. I feel sadness for the children there because they're not the ones who voted for it. They're suffering because of their parents. So I feel very, very, very sad for the children. But I do not feel sorry for you if you made your ex next to the ANC. If tonight you're going home and you haven't had a job in 10 years and your 300 Rand check from the government has already run out, you voted for it. I cannot feel sorry for something you brought upon yourself. If you're sick and tired of watching your township fall apart and there's no roads, there's no electricity, there's no internet, you're living in a shack, if you made your ex next to the ANC, you get what you vote for. That's your fault. And I do not feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for the people that you are doing this to. because there are plenty of people in those same townships who did not vote for this, who desperately want another government in power. And you're doing this to them. This is why I hate democracy, man. It is such an evil system that you can have a handful of people in the country effectively destroy everyone else's lives. It's just, it beggars belief. Everyone must suffer because there's, what did the ANC get? 12 million votes in the last election? Because there's 12 million. I want to include the EFF and the MKs as well. So let's say there's about 15 million South Africans that are holding the rest of us hostage. And people want to tell me democracy is the best system ever. It's not. Gert, how are you doing, sir? I'm vying to I'm vying to the US till an Afrikaner state is established. I don't know when that will happen. I don't know when that will happen. I would love the ANC to break, but my children can't afford a collapsed government. But now, here's the thing that your children will either pay for it now or they'll pay for it in the future. But they will pay for it. There is no world in which we and our children will not pay for the ANC's incompetence. We will pay for it. The question is when. The longer this goes on, the more expensive this payment will get. Because the bill runs ever higher. And this is sort of the same problem that I have with people who speak out against, for example, the Iran war. People like Tucker Carlson, people like Dave Smith. Their argument is essentially wait and see. Right? We shouldn't attack. We should wait. Wait for what? What are you waiting for? You've tried diplomacy. You've tried asking nicely. You've tried everything else. It has not worked. If you wait, and this government eventually... So even if I were to accept that they aren't close to building a nuclear bomb, let's say I accept that it's going to take Iran another 20 years to build a nuclear bomb. Is your suggestion, in other words, that we should give the Iranian state another 20 years before we attack them? Or another 19 years, when they have even more bombs, even more drones, even more military power to attack their neighbors with? Like, what is your solution? Because up until now, the do-nothing solution has not paid dividends. And so it seems to me there's only one real solution left. You have to remove that government, because that government cannot be reasoned with. If you have another solution, please bring it. But I don't see how the solution, just wait, is going to solve anything. You are a very weak man. At the very foundations of who you are as a person, you base your entire rumblings on what Western media tells you. Lefa, let's imagine for a second, Lefa, that you are correct. The West has showcased that the way in which it thinks leads to success. Now, I could base my entire worldview on African philosophy, which has showcased it knows how to fail. Um, or I could do it on Eastern philosophy, which has showcased that it knows how to kill hundreds of millions of its own people with starvation and things. Um, so, of the two, who would be a better idea? Like, who would I rather listen to? If of course you were correct, I wouldn't be so quick to start throwing around accusations. You have no foundation from which to do that. You have made no success that makes me think that you are worthy of listening, of being listened to. First, fix your own crap, fix your own country, fix your own continent, and then maybe I will take what you have to say seriously. Became a dangerous nut house because previous governments have allowed it to develop into a nuclear power. True. Just made me cry the beloved country. No, you didn't fail your own children. Look, life is messy, Ronald. Life is messy. Life is always going to be messy, right? What we're going through now, we were always going to go through it. And guess what? We're not the only ones going through this. Every single generation throughout history has gone through worse. And sometimes a little better, but still bad, right? We like to think that we're somehow this special kind of people that are suffering special kind of stuff. I saw the other day someone said, I'm so tired of living through history. I say, well, name a generation that didn't live through history. You can't, right? Every single generation throughout history lived through history. And there were wars, and there were rumors of wars, and there were all sorts of bad stuff that happened. This is just where we are now. The best you can do is to equip your children to be able to make a success of what they have. That's the best that you can do. And try to at least educate your children enough that they don't turn out like Leffy there, who seems to believe that the African view is the view that all of us should be emulating. It would be different if you could point to a single country that has made a success following the African vision. I would be willing to go, okay, maybe we should look at how Africans are doing things, because clearly there is a Wakanda. But there is no Wakanda. That was just a mythical story. Wakanda does not exist. And so Africa will not be fixed until Africans realize that their approach to economics is wrong. It's as simple as that. When I say Africans, I really do mean every single leftist. That includes the whites, that includes the blacks, that includes the coloreds, that includes the Indians, that includes every single person that lives on this continent, that for some reason, history is just not a good enough teacher. They have to consistently just double down. Well, the communism didn't work the last 80 years that we've tried it. This time will be different. We'll do it again. Africa really is like a collection of failed experiments. And every single African nation just goes from failed experiment to failed experiment to failed experiment. Not a single African nation actually just stops and says, hey, why don't we just do what America and Europe did? Let's try that. Since you're so into trying things, why don't we just try that? See how that goes. What is there to lose? What's there to lose? I don't understand it. It's not like you're sitting on a mountain of money or riches. You're living in a failed system. It's already falling apart, and yet You're afraid of going for capitalism because you lose what exactly? Your shack? You're already living in the shack. You may as well just try something else. Because clearly what you've been trying up until now didn't work that well. Richard, I'm going to assume that you joined the live stream without any context and you didn't hear what I had to say. You looked at the title and you decided that you're going to share your wisdom with all of us. When you enter into a conversation without any knowledge of what that conversation consists of, you more often than not end up looking like a fool. And you, my friend, you look like a fool. All depends what you see as a success. If success is living like a caveman, then Africa is the best. We know that that's not what Africans view as success. When you speak to most black people in South Africa, what they want is what we all consider to be successes. Right? They all want the same thing. And when you look at black people that have managed to free themselves from the system that genuinely destroys lives, you can look at how they live. Right? You can look at the things that they do, the businesses they build, the homes that they build. They want the same things. Where we differ is how we get there. And that's something that someone needs to do a study on Africa. Because I know history plays a part in it. That I know for a fact, right? Your history very much determines the economic system that you're most likely going to be sort of navigating towards. This is why communism works relatively well in China. Because historically speaking, China has always had a form of communism. And that's why, to some extent, the idea of communism seems to make it seems to resonate with Africa. But the problem is that it doesn't work quite the same way. Sorry, I'm trying to think how to explain this correctly. I think I have told you guys this before, but it is well established from a geopolitical perspective. If you want to know, there's Ramaga, how you doing? If you want to know what a country is most likely to do, looking at history is a great way of doing that. Right? Looking at history is an amazing way of doing that. Because the sort of historical or the cultural memory of a people will determine how they feel about certain things. So, for example, you can't go into Iraq and form democracy. Iraq has never had democracy. The people in Iraq doesn't know what democracy is, nor do they care. So forming democracy in a country that has never had it, that has never had people that are free and have always pretty much they've always been subjects to kings. And that's sort of how it works, right? So to try and form a democracy there, it just will never have worked. So we can look at the history of a people and we can determine what kind of system those people would most likely navigate towards. The interesting thing here is Africa appears to be caught between a broken ideology and a very strange cultural identity. So African culture is very much made up of chieftains powerful men surrounding the chieftains, and then the people who live in the village under the chieftains. Now, you might say, but Stephen, that sounds like perfect for communism. Sounds like communism would work really well there. Yes and no. Communism works really well for the chieftain and the strongmen around the chieftain. They like communism because it enforces the chieftain and the strongmen around the chieftain. But where communism fails is when it comes to the villagers, the tribe and the tribesmen. See, because here in Africa, the tribesmen were largely communal by choice, not by force. The chieftain and the strongman did not dictate to the tribesmen what they can and cannot do. They were actually, when we go through history, they were very free. Not quite as free as, for example, in Europe. So the peasants in Europe, they were completely free. This is where we see the first ever instances of private property already in the Dark Ages. Right, long before the liberal Enlightenment era or property rights was even a thing, peasants would buy and sell their own properties left, right, and center. Right, and so peasants in Europe were very free. Africa didn't have that. So the people in the tribe didn't have private property. They didn't have autonomous automatic rights. But the chieftain and the strongman did understand that if you don't leave the tribe alone, the tribe would become problematic. And so, for the most part, the chieftain and the leaders yes, they got first access to the best meat, first access to the best honey and the best beer and the best whatever. But the other people also got, right? They were also allowed to eat. They were also allowed to take care of themselves, and they could do a lot of the things for themselves. That's where communism completely breaks down in Africa. It's because communism isn't the top guys get all of the stuff and the bottom guys get to do whatever they want. Communism is the top guys get all of the stuff and they tell the bottom guys what they can and cannot do. That's where communism continuously breaks down in Africa. That is why Africa has not been able to replicate Chinese success in the 40, 45, almost 50 years that Africa has been trying out communism. It has consistently failed to reproduce the Chinese model of success with communism because its own people will not follow the model. Its own people will not follow the model. And, very importantly, the chieftains of the tribe, so to speak, right, were historically members of the tribe. But Cyril Ramaphosa isn't a member of the Zulu tribe, right? Cyril Ramaphosa isn't a member of the Xhosa tribe or the Venda tribe. I don't know which. Is he Sepedi? Or is he? He's not Twani. What's Cyril Ramaphosa? He's Sepedi, no? Is he Venda? Yeah, okay, so Venda. But this means that if the tribal leader is Venda, why would the Xhosa or the Sepedi or the Zulu allow the Venda chieftain to take all the best stuff? Again, makes no sense. Because remember, if you look at China, China has had a long history of, I mean, I think China has the most cultures and languages of any country in the world smooshed into, one country. But all of those people have, for thousands of years, basically been subject to the emperor of China. They were allowed to do their own stuff, but the emperor was the emperor, and so they're willing to accept it. That's not how it worked in Africa. You can't be the tribal leader of, the chieftain of the Venda tribe, and then suddenly come tell the Zulu tribe that I'm your leader too. So on a fundamental level, Africa's dance with communism, even with as broken as communism is, can never reach the success that it reached in the USSR or in China. Because with the USSR, the Russian people, again, they always had a czar. The Russian people were always serfs. They were always just sort of below the czar, and the czar was always a dictator. And so that's just sort of part of the cultural memory of the Russian people. They're not really people that, and you could see how unsuccessful communism was there. You look at China and you see the same problems in China. But again, historically speaking, culturally speaking, communism has a higher chance of success in China than what it has anywhere else. And that's why they've been able to replicate it and do it for as long as they have. Africa doesn't have that. These things doesn't make sense in Africa. So I predict that Africa will pretty much always struggle because at its fundamental sort of at its fundamental foundation, communism and the adherents of communism, the leaders love communism because it gives the leaders a lot of power. The tribes don't like communism because it gives leaders that are not their leaders a lot of power. But also, it means that they now have to do what the leaders say, and that's not something that is culturally acceptable for the African mind. So, that would be a geopolitical realpolitik explanation for why Africa continues to be one of the poorest continents, well, the poorest continent in the world. I get the tribal thing, but it doesn't take away from the bottom line, which is capitalism is driving our business system. Nothing communistic about that. What the government implements leans towards communism. So, grant capitalism, right, requires a number of things in order to be true. Just the idea that you're capable of doing business does not a capitalist system make. Because even in China, people can open businesses. People can own their own businesses in China. No one would call China a capitalist nation. China isn't capitalist. China is a communist system. The only difference is China would probably, nowadays, people would say China is a neo-communist system because China has effectively become a stakeholder capitalist country, where the government has a bunch of stakeholders that run the economy. That's not capitalism. The word simply suggests free market. And it must be that the market is free to operate. When you have a government that at every turn places roadblocks in front of what the market is capable of doing, you no longer have a capitalist market. Now you have a controlled market, a socialist market, a mixed market, a communist market. You can pick and choose. I would say South Africa, probably at this point best described, would be a mixed market economy, where we have a large segment of government interference in the market with some private ownership under contestation by the government, which furthermore makes the government or makes the market even less free. Okay, so Alexandra. Okay, I'll take your most wrong point first. The Chinese economy is not greater than that of the USA. The Chinese economy isn't even half that of the USA. So just on that, you really need to see what your sources are on that. The United States economy is the largest and also the greatest economy in the world, and it's not even close. So just let's get that out of the way. Secondly, in order to do business in China, China has a two-tier model. So there's two tiers. There is the small, insignificant model. These are the small businesses, the sort of spaza shops and the local shops and that. The Chinese couldn't care less about those shops. They don't control them. There's very little taxes. They can sort of do whatever they want. Then there's the larger companies. And the Chinese model goes as follows. The second a company gets large enough that it could potentially create political problems for the government gets involved. Every single corporation in China has government representatives that sit on the board as well as work in their own department in that business. I know because I have friends who live in China. I have friends who do business in China. Every single business in China that is large enough gets its own dedicated state department. These are representatives of the state which the company needs to pay, and these people make sure that these companies do what the government says they can and cannot do. That is not a capitalist system. That's not how capitalism works. Unless, of course, you don't know what capitalism is. And so often when I speak to leftists and I ask them what is capitalism, they'll tell me it's private property rights, it's ownership. Or the one I got the other day that genuinely made me cringe was it's capital investment. That's not what it is. Capitalism is free markets. It's the idea that I am free to do business in the way that I see fit, provided I don't hurt anyone else. So I can't shoot you if you don't buy from me. But outside of that, I'm allowed to do whatever I want. If you don't have that, you don't have a capitalist market. And I would actually go so far as to say the US doesn't have a capitalist system. I've said this before, and a lot of United States people got very angry with me. But the US is not capitalist. If you want to open a business in the US, you need a government permit. You need to apply with the government. You have to register your business with the government. There are certain regulations that you must adhere to if you want to run your business. The government gets to tell you when you can do what, how you can do it, what you can sell, what you can't sell, where you can sell it from. They'll interfere if they think the pricing is wrong. If you want to build a home, the government has to be involved. They tell you how high your house is allowed to be, how high the walls are allowed to be, what kind of materials are you allowed to use, what can you and can you not use. All of this is stuff by the government. That's not a free market. That's a controlled market. That by definition makes it not a capitalist system. Mixed, sure, but not capitalist. It's important that we're specific. Because when you just start throwing out that China is a capitalist country, by what measurement? Some things are nationalized and other things are completely private. So Napoleon, I don't. So here's my view. If I were to become president of South Africa, here's what I would do. I would open the entire economy to the free market. If you're a private company and you want to build a nuclear power station, go for it. Build your nuclear power station, provide electricity to the whole country. But I wouldn't close down Eskom. I would force Eskom to compete against private enterprises. And I would do the same thing in every single regard. I would go to every single state-owned enterprise and I would tell them, you're now a for-profit government business. You need to make profits. You need to make money because I want the government to be funded by the SOEs so that I can drop taxes and allow people to make their money and keep their money. So you have Talcom, which is already doing that. Eskom can do that. Denal can do that. There's hundreds of companies. SAA, you can restart them again, but they compete with the private sector. This gives you two options, two things that you get to control. Number one, your own state-owned enterprise has to compete, and therefore it will probably get a lot better. Look at Talcom, for example. Most people I speak to say that Talcom is one of the best service providers in the country. I was with OpenServe for 10 years in Pretoria, and I can tell you they're amazing. OpenServe, from what they used to be and what they are now, amazing turnaround, right? So it shows you just how good private sector competition is for even a state-owned enterprise. But it also gives you the ability to lower prices and stop companies from just driving prices up as much as they want. Because now I can say, if Eskom starts to realize that other power producers are charging 10 or 15% more than what they should be charging, we can drop our electricity prices and bring all of those others back down. So it gives you this there's competition between the government and the private sector, but the private sector is still able to outcompete the government if they so choose, right? And so from that, I would argue that's probably a better model. And that's probably a model that I would follow if I was president, something to that effect. But I would never nationalize anything. Nationalizing something doesn't work. You end up getting the worst system. I can promise you. If you get sick tomorrow, the countries that provide free healthcare are the last countries where you want healthcare. If you get deadly ill tomorrow, like you need life-saving treatment, the countries that provide free healthcare are the last countries where you want to receive healthcare from. Because nationalized industries never provide the level of care that what the private sector will do, ever. I'm German, so I think the ability to organize things is very different to the SA government. Yeah, SA clearly isn't able to manage even a lemonade stand, but yeah, that's true. But you then also have to hope that those in control of the national businesses will actually lower their price. But Christian, that's exactly it. If I have Eskom, right, running electricity, it's the government's business, and Eskom realizes that we can drop electricity prices by 20% and still make profit. We can still make money, just 20% lower. If those other companies don't lower their price, what is the customers of South Africa going to do? Say, for example, you're with Energy SA. It's a new company that opened up that has a bunch of nuclear power stations. But you see Eskom is 20% lower per month on electricity than what Energy SA is. Why wouldn't you switch to Eskom? But you would have every incentive to switch to Eskom because you'll save money on electricity. Or vice versa. If you see Eskom is way too expensive, you'll switch to Energy SA because they're cheaper. So it's ultimately a way for the government to indirectly keep companies honest. Now, you could have instances where, for example, Vumatel in South Africa. Vumatel has consistently been one of the most expensive fiber providers in the country. But they justify that by saying we're the fastest and the most reliable fiber provider in the country. So people who switch to Vumatel doesn't switch to Vumatel because they're the cheapest. They support Vumatel because apparently Vumatel is the most reliable. Whether that's true or not depends on whatever, right? That's not the argument. So, yes, you could technically have a system whereby Energy SA says, look, guys, we're not dropping our prices. We're happy with our prices as is. We provide you with a stable network. Your electricity will never shut off. We will provide you electricity, come hell or high water, whatever the case might be. But for that, you are paying 20% more. And some customers may actually say, look, I like the stability. I like the fact that the network is guaranteed. So I'm going to pay the 20% more and I'm still going to keep my electricity. But other customers will leave. And it's still allowing the market to dictate who succeeds and who fails. How do you explain Eskom, though? It's a disaster now, but Eskom was nationalized and world class. But philosophy, Eskom, what do you mean? How do I explain the disaster? Jared, I do agree with you. In the current way that Eskom is being run, competition will kill Eskom. But I'm okay with that. Like I said, if I'm the president and this is what I would do, if a company, because there would be, if I was president, let's just say that straight up. If I was president, the constitution would be changed around SOEs to make it clear that a government company cannot operate for more than 2 consecutive years on the public funding. So, for example, if Eskom suddenly starts to go down and starts to lose everything, after 2 years of government bailouts, Eskom needs to be sold. Because the public is not supposed to be paying for these SOEs. These SOEs are supposed to pay for themselves. And in that case, now you've lost that business. Maybe you can restart another business later down the road, but that business is gone now. You had to sell it, whatever the case may be, right? So the government needs to compete on equal footing with other companies. It can't just be endless money that you're flooding into it. Eskom was not capitalist and was good. Philosophy, so Eskom was the closest that you could possibly get to capitalist government run. Right? So the government did take a very hands-on approach. And I think to some extent, there was also the case that there was never any time to relax. South Africa was effectively under constant threat and constant attack. Right? And so it means that you have to put a lot more effort in and you are a lot more awake. Normally, what we see with corruption is that corruption flourishes during easy times, not hard times. Hard times tend to breed character, it tends to breed sort of resilience. Hard times doesn't really produce corruption. But that is not to say that there wasn't massive corruption under the apartheid government either. There was, and we know that there was. Right? And arguing that, oh, but look at Eskom and look at how successful Eskom was, does not explain why no other country in the world is able to achieve the same. Desiree, very true. You're also, I think, taking a very sort of you're taking a very limited view. Your view is sort of, it was a great company. Yeah. But would it have been a great company in 150 years from now, from then? If ASCIM, if the apartheid government was still in power today, would we have started to see ASCIM sort of backslide and sort of disappear and sort of, get more corrupt? We don't know the answer to this because obviously we didn't live through that version of history. But every single government department, without fail, around the world, ends up corrupt and incapable of doing the basic function that it was established for. Every single one. There is not a single country in the world where people don't complain about home affairs or about the licensing department or about healthcare. These are all state-run enterprises, and none of them actually work. None of them work anywhere near as well as the private sector does. And so your question, how do I explain it? An exception to the rule only proves the rule. Apartheid also had a really cheap labor force running it, way below true market value. This added value that was disingenuous. I think to some extent, yes, but also my main contention with the success of ASCIM would ultimately just be war. The apartheid government wasn't really in a position to allow for massive corruption or a weakening of basic infrastructure. They were at war. One of the key requirements for that war to be fought was cheap and efficient and available electricity. Because remember, we were designing all of our own weapons, building and manufacturing all of our own weapons, all of our own ammunition. These are factories that had to be able to run 24/7. So ASCIM was very much almost like it was a national security issue. And so they made sure to pour as much energy and effort into it as is humanly possible. That does not mean that should the National Party have been capable of defeating the communist forces in Angola and maybe stop the liberation movements in South Africa, and maybe even they were able to stop apartheid, but still stay in power. So let's imagine they brought an end to apartheid, but the black people went, well, we still like you, so we'll keep voting for you because you set us free. And then the National Party stays in power. It doesn't mean that 30 years on, they would still have been successful in running ASCIM. Because if the wars are stopped and there's no more real interference, and no real incentive to build strong institutions, would that have continued? I don't know, right? We didn't get that version of history, but it is an interesting one to think of. The big, the pipes aren't immortal, complain that they can't anticipate, can't implement their own policies. Yeah, Christo, I get what you mean. Podcast, according to Meta Digital, on demand, episodic, audio focused, a live stream does not fit the criteria. The equation usually balances itself somewhere down the line. Yeah, the point that I make more, and I should probably be a little bit more specific in this regard, given enough time, every single government business will fail. If you just need to give it enough time, it will fail. Government, there's some things that government do, one could argue, reasonably well. There's some things that one could argue that we need the government to do it because we would prefer not to have private people do it. And then there's some things where we have to admit the government should not be doing it in the first place. Now, I can actually make an argument that providing electricity should technically be a government thing because electricity is a national security thing. A country that doesn't have electricity doesn't have sovereignty. So you could make an argument that in the interest of national security, electricity should be nationalized so that the government can ensure that they have electricity even in times of war, right? So you can make that argument. There is an argument for it. even then, I would not exclude the private sector from being able to do it as well, right? Because I think it's fine if the government is standing in competition of private sector, but if it stands alone, I think ESCOM, what you get with ESCOM now is just what it's going to be. I don't think that will ever change. Firstly, how you doing? No government. Everything government touches turns to shit. They interfere into every aspect in our lives. They're intensely evil to begin with. They spoil everything. Firstly, I do agree with you. As I said, what I'm talking about here is sort of uh, what's the maximalist level to which I would allow government. So, for example, I think it's good that the government has a military. The way I would reimagine the military in South Africa is quite different, though, because I would prefer if every province in the country had a military that then make up the military. So if South Africa is ever attacked, the provinces would come together and they would stop the invading force, right? But every province should have its own military. That way, the national government can't tell provinces what they can and cannot do. But I do think that's the sort of thing that you don't really want private people involved. You don't want private militaries, because private militaries are almost certainly going to start wars for cash and profit. Religion is ruining the country. Grand Zeno, how do you figure? I get what you mean, Park. Trust me. There are days where I also hope for good news in South Africa, so I don't have to, consistently cover everything that's falling apart. Um, because a lot of things are falling apart in our country. And Grand Zeno, it's funny when I hear atheists say that religion is ruining everything, right? And I think to myself, based on every single metric, Christians, church going Christians, are happier when they get married, they stay married, they have happy and healthy and good children, they raise their children. They tend to be Christians are far more generous with their own time and their money to those who are more needy than themselves. The vast majority of charity work in every country is done by Christians, not by the atheists, right? You're not a former Christian. You were never a Christian to begin with, Grant. If you were a Christian, you would still be a Christian. So let's just get that straight. The Bible makes it very clear. Once you are a Christian, you cannot lose your salvation. So the fact that you have left the church means that you were never part of it to begin with. And I would go so far as to say you don't really know your own theology, and that's why you have all of these ideas about it. But on every metric, Christians are better than atheists on almost every metric that you would consider good things to do. Christians take care of the poor. Christians take care of the sick. Christians built the first hospitals. Christians built the first schools and universities. Christians are at the forefront of charity work for battered women, battered men. Christians build families. Christians raise their children to not steal, murder, rob, and kill. Now let's look at atheists and what atheists have contributed to this great world. Not a single country that you can name has been built by atheists. Not a single one. If we look at the atheistic movement throughout the world, we look at countries in Europe that the more atheists they have gotten, the worse they have started to perform, the worse their societies have started to get, the more issues internally and externally these countries continue to face. We see atheists do almost no charity work whatsoever, unless it's just sort of pretending like they care about charity. We don't see the massive success that atheists sort of tout, because most of the things that you believe is just normal in a society, the things that you would tout. So when I tell you, so what do you think people should do? Every single thing that you think people should do, you get from the Bible. When I ask you, where does morality come from? You'll tell me, why do you need a book to tell you what is and isn't good? And then I go, well, because what is and isn't good isn't universally accepted. For example, you go to the Middle East, they consider it very good to throw people off the top of houses if they're gay. They consider that a good thing. In fact, they consider that as a very good thing. So it's not universal that you should just not kill people and you shouldn't rape people and you shouldn't do this. It comes from my book. The issue is you're a fish unaware of the water in which you swim. You think that you came up with all these nice ideas of how a person should be to be moral, and you completely fail to realize that every idea that you have of what it takes to be a good and moral and decent human being comes from the Bible. That's where you got it. One of my favorite things is when an atheist tells me, do unto others as you would have done unto you. And it's like, yeah, where did you get that? Where did that come from? I can show you the verse. I can show you the verse. I'm aiming to speak for you, Grand Zeno, because every single one of you atheists have exactly the same argument. I've spoken to enough of you because I used to be one of you. Literally 2 years ago, I was an atheist the same as you. I have heard every single argument you can possibly make, and I can literally listen to how you speak, and I will tell you who your disciples are. Based on your own arguments, I can tell you whether or not you listen to Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, or Alex O'Connor. Literally, I can just listen to you. And I'll go, oh, I see who your apostles are. Because you are in the faith of atheism, which the cornerstone of atheism is pretending like it is not a faith. Even though you have your reverends, you have your apostles, you have your church fathers, and you speak from their mouths. You have not a single thing, and I can guarantee you this, because I've spoken to enough of you, you have not a single thing that you have come up for yourself. Yeah, you deconstructed and constructed into nothing. Deconstructionism is the first sign that you don't know what you're doing. In order to deconstruct something, you have to construct it on the other side. I'll tell you what your problem is, Grant. Why did you start deconstructing the faith? I'll tell you why. There is some sin in your life. Now, usually it's sexually. So usually it's a guy that wants to sleep with other men or a woman that wants to sleep with other women. It's usually sexually, but it could be something else. You might be one of the few people that I've met that deconstructed the faith, that wasn't just them being horny and wanting to do things that the Christian faith says you're not allowed to do. But then you start deconstructing the Bible. And you're not deconstructing the Bible because you're actually honest with yourself. You're deconstructing the Bible because you're trying to get a way to justify your own sin. You don't want to stop the sin. You don't want to stop doing the sin. You want to find a way to make the sin okay. And ultimately what you do is you deconstruct yourself out of the faith. Because that's the only way you can actually make the sin go away. By pretending that it isn't a sin in the first place. That's the story of every deconstructionist out there. That's how every single deconstructionist gets to deconstructionism. And when you actually talk to them, they didn't solve the sin. They still feel as guilty as ever about the things that they feel. Now they're just angry. And now they go after the faith. They want to attack the faith because they hope that if the faith disappears, their depression and their hatred of themselves will also disappear. That's the only reason you hate religion, my friend. Because technically speaking, if you're not going to a church, if you're not, spending time among Christians, they have no effect on you, Grant. Me being a Christian is of no value to you. I don't come to your house and tell you what an evil, bad person you are. You're the one who came to mine and told me what an evil, bad person I am for being a Christian. The only reason you're doing that, Grant, is because you yourself are dying of your own guilt. And you're hoping that if this faith were somehow to disappear, your guilt would disappear alongside it. And if that wasn't the case, then you wouldn't have any feelings about Christianity one way or the other. You would be completely neutral. because you don't live in a country where the government is Christian. You don't live in a country where Christians make any of the rules. So why is Christianity such a big problem for you, Grant? Well, what's the issue? You don't think realistically, Grant. You do not. And your idea of this is also not true. They didn't just have church in their own houses. We have examples from like literally the 2nd century of buildings where the Christians would meet. Not houses, buildings where the Christians would meet. So you're not only are you not thinking realistically, you're lying while you're doing it. Don't do that, my friend. They said abuse turned them away, if I read it right. Yeah, but if that is the case, then not only is he not thinking realistically, he's allowing the evil of someone else to rob him of the eternal gift of Christ. So think about the logic there. The logic is that if there is a Christ, I would rather have nothing to do with him because of some other evil guy that did some stuff to me. Or some other evil girl that did some stuff to me. That is I'm sorry to say it, but that is stupid. Judge Christ for who Christ is, not for how Christians operate. Because Christians are broken. There isn't a single Christian in this world that is just good and holy and perfect. The whole point, the whole reason we need Christ is because we are broken. That's why Christians go to church. Because we're broken and we need Christ in order to save us. Judging Christ on what Christians do, that is just asinine. That is just asinine. And all that teaches me is that you never wanted to believe in him in the first place. So any excuse to ultimately get to a place where you can commit to your sin, because you think right now that your sin will free you. You think right now that your sin will free you. I guarantee you it will not. There will come a point, Grant, it will be either now, in a decade, in 2 decades from now. For me, it took 2 decades. Where you will feel trapped and you will be at the point where suicide seems like a viable option. Because that's where I was. Where your sin will encompass you and encase you so heavily that all of that freedom you now experience and feel, you'll suddenly realize, but I am not free. I am a slave to this sin. I am just constantly stuck looking for new ways to support and feed into the sin. It will come. It will come for you the same way it came for me, the same way it comes for every single person. Behind in chat, problem with pure free market system is lack of some regulation. Nephilim, no worries, man. If your knowledge on the world leads you to hell, then of what use is your knowledge? If the feeling was made in a child's mind, you can be stuck there in abuse mindset reasoning. I don't know that much about his abuse story, if the abuse story is even true, obviously. But again, blaming Christ for things that people do, that just seems strange. Sir Burgio, how you doing, bro? Stephen, as an Akalon viewer back in the day, and seeing one of your most recent videos about the ANC, I'm somehow not surprised. Feel it even here. The shut up and obey or be called a racist narrative. Oh yeah, sir. That's very much just the way it works here in South Africa. How can anyone think that God did not create this world? Israel, that's a good question. That's a good question. Really just seeing how one can be stuck. Grant, are you suggesting that I can't look at science and I can't? I became a Christian because of science. Not in spite of it, because of science. I don't necessarily even think that you're a serious person, and from the way you speak, I am quite convinced of the fact that you are very young. At this point, I'm willing to bet early 20s, if even that. And it suggests to me that you really do not know what you're talking about, because the way you talk about this, like, what are you talking about? I can now focus on my education, including science and poetry. The Bible is full of poetry, my man. Full. There's entire chapters in the Bible that is just poetry. So, do you think Christians can't look at poetry? Like, what the hell are you talking about? And then science. What are you talking about? Christians can't look at science, or Christians don't look at science. Some of the greatest scientists you know, right, and on which the entire scientific model is based, are Christian. So I'm not sure what you're talking about. Stop fighting and tell me what plan backfired. Well, I already told you what plan backfired, Cross. I have to go. Thank you for the stream, Stefan. Keep up the great work and have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care of yourself, Jaguar. Thank you so much for hanging out, sir. All the evil in this world is because we don't obey God. True. The problem with mainstream Christianity is free from the law, therefore no objective definition of sin. In its place, they confuse emotions for spiritual. So I wouldn't agree with that, because I would say, pretty much, I'm a Baptist, so it's probably not the most mainstream Christian denomination. But I think the problem more with Christianity is that you have a bunch of people who think they're Christian, even though they're not. That's the biggest problem. The vast majority of people's judgments on who Christians are is based on people who are not Christian. Right, so you have, for example, these Christians that will tell you God is love, and therefore homosexuality is okay because God is love. You're not a Christian. You don't even understand the basic tenets of God is love. You clearly don't understand the philosophical ideas that are espoused in the concept of God as love. Right? If you're a Christian, or if you claim to be a Christian but you believe in universal salvation, I have questions. I'm not suggesting that you're not a Christian. I'm not that strong on that, but I do have questions when it comes to universal salvation. And fundamentally, the one thing that I see very few people do is, how are we supposed to judge Christians? How are we supposed to judge whether or not someone is a Christian? That doesn't mean true. Clip alchemy, I'll answer that in a second. Jesus tells us, by their fruits you shall know them. That's how you judge a Christian. Are there Christians that, have severe issues and struggle and sin and make mistakes? Yes, absolutely. But by their fruits you shall know them. And that's something that I see missing from a lot of people's judgments, is the fruit. You'll see someone who claims to be Christian, and yet their lives is a mess. There's no repentance whatsoever. There's no attempt to, even try to be a good Christian or to be a good son of God, because ultimately that's what being a Christian means. It's to be a son and a daughter of God. And as a son and daughter of God, it means that we are at least trying to live in accordance with his will. And try being the operative word there, because we can never actually do it, but we need to try, right? And how do we try? This is the one thing that took me a long time to get, and maybe this is of help to any Christian here. This took me a long time to recognize and to realize. How do you fight your sin? Because we're called by Christ to be perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. Right? So we're called to defeat sin because we are freed from sin by the price that Christ paid on our behalf so that we can be free from sin. But how do you do that? Have you ever tried to defeat sin? Like, have you ever actively told yourself, I'm never going to watch another porn video, or I'm never going to think about a girl again in this way, or a guy again in this way. I'm never going to swear again. I'm never going to do this again. I'm going to read my Bible every single day. Have you ever tried to do that and just see how long that happens? Like, how long that actually works for? I could answer for myself and say not long. It does not last long. The strength that I have to defeat sin is basically zero. And then I had this thought, and this genuinely, I believe, came from the Holy Spirit. Where does sin not exist? With God. There is no sin with God. So how do you defeat your sin? By searching for God. The more time you spend in the Bible, the more time you spend in prayer, the more time, and yes, this does actually help, reading books, theological books, books that help explain a lot of what the Bible is. Just make sure that you know the author isn't a complete kook or a deconstructionist, because, oh boy, if you want to go down some stupid areas in Christianity, go follow the deconstructionist movement. But by spending time with God, the closer you get to Christ, the further away you will be from your sin. That's how we're supposed to defeat it. Not by trying to, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and, just get yourself right with God, by just searching and allowing the Holy Spirit to do the work in you. Your problem is that you reason with emotions, confuse it with spiritual and not with logic. Bill, what do you mean? Spending time with Jesus, that way he will know me. True. Define sin. The sin is, well, it depends on how we go by it, because the word in ancient Greek means to miss the mark. Right? That's sin, to miss the mark. And so anything you do that goes against the nature of God is sin. Anita, how are you doing? Because so my problem is, when we say sin is the transgression of the law, this can create within itself some interesting debates, right? Because what law are you referring to? Because remember, Jesus came to fulfill the law, right? But you have to also understand that the law isn't just one thing. There wasn't just the law. The Jews themselves didn't just follow the law. They had the law of the what's it called again? Uh the Ten Commandments, that was the moral law of God. Then they had the administrative law, which was how they, how they governed their society. And then there was the I can't remember the other name now, but three sets of laws. As Christians, we believe the first two are gone. The only law that now remains is the Ten Commandments, right? The moral law. And of that, which is the greatest, love your God above all other, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? Those are the two greatest commandments within the law. Those are the ones that we have to fulfill. But we also now believe that we are no longer under the law, right? We are under a new covenant. The original law that was given by God to the Israelites were the law of death. We are now under the law of life, the new covenant. The first covenant signified by the law, the moral law of God, and then Christ comes and he becomes the covenant of life, and that is the new covenant. So I would warn, because oftentimes what you get in this is when you get into these debates, you'll get the Seventh-day Adventists that start to step in and they go, see, so the Sabbath. And now you have to go through a whole thing of going, okay, yes, the Sabbath happened on a Saturday for the Jews, but there is no reason anywhere that it must only ever be on a Saturday. None. That was not the point. And Jesus himself even says, man was made for, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Speaking out against people who want to bind people to the Sabbath being some kind of saving thing, right? So it's a salvation issue. If you don't hold the Sabbath, you can't be saved. So I have a couple of Seventh-day Adventists that email me literally every single week and tell me that I'm not a Christian because I don't uphold the Sabbath. So I'm careful when people just say sin is transgressing the law, because I usually know where that's going. We're no longer under the law for those who are in Christ. The Good Shepherd 100% agree with you, but then it is also important to remember there are Christians that take that too far, right? So there's Christians that will go, we're no longer under the law, and then they take what Paul said, should we therefore then sin so that grace may abound? And they just go, yippee. That is also not how it works, right? We are no longer under the law. That is true. Meaning, I no longer have to feel guilty when I transgress the law. Because I will transgress the law. It's impossible not to. I'm human. There's no way for me not to transgress the law. But I no longer have to feel guilty because Christ already paid the price for my transgressions. That does not mean that I don't still try to live to God's glory. And how do I live to God's glory? By adhering to the law, right? To love my neighbor as I love myself, and to love God above, thou shalt have no other gods before me, right? Those are how I honor God, is by honoring him with my heart, my soul, my everything, and making sure that he is the only God that I have and the only God that I worship, and loving my neighbor, doing kind to those around me insofar as it is possible for me to do, and serving, right? Because Christ himself said, I did not come to be served, but to serve. And so it's important, I think. Don't get me wrong. I am not saying we can sin willingly. I know, Good Shepherd. I'm just saying we should be careful how we word it, because I can guarantee you there's people that, take this crap and they just sort of run to the furthest extremes with that argument. So I'm so used to the arguments that I oftentimes get that as I hear you make it, I go, I agree, but also be careful because you will get people that run away with this stuff. We're funny if South Africa were to be in the end times because of the relationship with Iran. Clip Alchemy, that would actually be funny. Mom words, that legislation will be signed into law, like the NHI, Scallums just did, the ANC again. Oh yeah, Joe, that will absolutely happen. The goal isn't to prove your belief is right, but to live it. Respecting those who believe differently is just as important. MCC, I do agree with you there, right? It's not incumbent upon Christians to force their religion onto anyone. We're not called to do that. Christianity cannot convert through compulsion, right? I cannot compel you to believe what I believe. All I can do is share the good news with you and share my own testimony, right? And then let my life be the testimony of Christ. And I hope that it is. Look, that doesn't mean I don't make mistakes. And it doesn't mean that I don't get frustrated, right? I do. I'll be the first to admit that. There are times where I go on X and literally 5 minutes on X, I have to pray and I have to say, Father, forgive me. Because I know that I got annoyed now. I know I got angry now. And I mean, I'll even admit it here. The way I spoke to Grand, that's not okay. And I'll admit, I got frustrated because I know the arguments that Grand is making, and Grand was trying to get a rise out of me. He was trying to offend as much as possible, and he succeeded in that. Does that mean that it's his fault and his fault? No, it's my fault. I should not have allowed him to get to me in that way, and I shouldn't have gotten nasty and angry. So I make mistakes a lot, right? I would argue, I always say this. Paul says, I am the greatest of all sinners. And when I read that, I always go, that's just because Paul didn't know me yet. Because if Paul knew me, Paul would literally have written there, I am a great sinner, but at least I'm not as bad as Stefan. Because I'm not a good guy, right? But yeah, it's sort of, I get angry and I get annoyed, and then I say things that I shouldn't say, or I get nasty in ways that I shouldn't be nasty. Yeah, it happens. But then you apologize, you ask forgiveness, and you hope, above hope, that it doesn't happen again. That you can learn. We're all human and make mistakes. I can point fingers when around Christians. I'd rather help them in their belief than mine. I don't think you should worry too much about that. Remember, being challenged is just part of the game. And it's good. It's good to be challenged. It's very good to have your faith challenged. I'm not one of those Christians that runs away from a challenge. Because to me, it's important that I know what is true. It's not important that I just, defend Christianity. I believe in Christ because I know that Christ is real. That's why I believe in Christ. But if someone were to come out and say that they have evidence that he isn't real, I will listen to that argument. I will look at the evidence. Because fundamentally, it's more important to me that I am truthful than it is that I'm right. The struggle with rage and frustration is real. Chart, so true. Christian worship on Sunday because Constantine ruled it. Sunday is exactly what it says. Sun worship. Monday is what it says. Moon and so forth. Firstly, so that's not why Christians worship on Sunday. So we have actually from Josephus, who lived in the 1st century. So this would be in memory of Christ and Christ's death. We actually have evidence in the 1st century of a large swarm of Jews, because remember at the time they weren't called Christians, they were still just considered Jews. In fact, the Romans for almost 3 centuries thought that Christians were just a Jewish sect. They didn't really know what to make of these guys. That's just because to them, the Christians also serve one God, but they also have Christ and the Holy Spirit, but it's still one God. So from the Romans' perspective, they were just Jews, but they were like a sect within the Jewish faith. And we have from Josephus, so this is extra biblical, we have thousands of Jews that started to go to the synagogue on a Sunday rather than on a Saturday. Already in the 1st century. So this is long before Constantine lays down that Sundays will be considered the Sabbath. And it is true that Constantine did lay that down, but it was only laid down because at the time, all of the Christians were already going to church on a Sunday. And so Sunday was considered to be the new holy day because all the Christians were already doing it. So it just made sense that if you're going to give people off from work, you do it on the day that they're already not going to work because they're going to church. Right? So people oftentimes think that Constantine did a lot more things than what he actually did. But Josephus writes about this. Early Jews, thousands of them starting to go to synagogue on a Sunday rather than on a Saturday, which made the Pharisees super annoyed because obviously they're not upholding the Sabbath as the Pharisees thought it should be. Lamborghini with the 70 Rand donation. Truly appreciate you, sir. Thank you. You're far too kind. The covenant and the laws that were introduced actually promote freedom. The closer you are to following the law, the more freedom you possess, freedom from the oppression of sin. True. I heard this, Lamborghini. This was a phenomenal explanation. It's not actually from a Protestant pastor, but it was still phenomenal. I believe it was either an Anglican priest or a Catholic priest, but just listen to how he explains it. The law, how is it that the law makes us free? Because you think about it and you go, wait, so I have this law that tells me what I can and cannot do. That sounds like the opposite of freedom, right? Watchman Stone, thank you so much for the 28 Rand donation, dude. Really appreciate you. Thank you. You're far too kind. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Except, and he starts like this. He goes, as I stand in front of you now, I am a free English speaker. I speak English freely. Like, I don't have to think about the words that I'm about to say. They just come. I know what I want to say and I just say it. The words flow freely from my mouth. But that wasn't always the case. When I was a little boy, I didn't know what words to use where. I didn't know how this different past, the tenses were supposed to be constructed, what vowels and consonants were. I didn't understand the rules of the English language. And then, as I spoke, my parents would tell me when I did it wrong and would tell me when I do it right. And fundamentally, as time goes on, the more I learned the rules of English, the freer I became in speaking English, to where now I can simply speak it and it's easy to understand. Right? You can all hear what I'm saying, and I don't have to sit here and sort of grasp or gasp at the words. And you hear it from people who don't know how to speak English. When they'll speak to you, they'll be like, and they don't have the word because they don't know the rules, and therefore they can't speak it freely. And when I heard that analogy, I was like, it makes a lot of sense. The more you learn of the law of God, the freer that law makes you to live the life that you were made to live. Because remember, we were made to worship God. We are a worshiping creature. We were made for His delight. So by learning what we were made to do, we ultimately become free to be what we were made to do. And on that note, I'm going to love you and leave you because I still have to go buy flour. I have some friends coming over this afternoon or this evening. We're going to be playing board games. And I want to bake some bread because I think we're doing like a soup night or something. So I need to bake some bread before they arrive. Ladies and gentlemen, to everyone that donated money, to everyone that supports this channel financially, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. Your donations it means everything to me. That you find value enough in the work that I do here, that you want to support it financially. Wow, George, thank you so much for the 140 Rand donation. I really appreciate you, sir. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're very, very kind. And it is your first super chat on a live stream. I am absolutely blessed and humbled that I would be the first that you would support. So thank you so much for that. Christian, thank you as well to you. Ladies and gentlemen, please have a wonderful weekend. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones, your family. Enjoy your braais and barbecues if you're in America. Really, really appreciate all of you. And I will see all of you in the next one. Peace. I'm doing this because some people got really angry at the other way I do it. So you won. I'll do the peace the way that you guys want, even though this is also peace. This is also peace. This is not peace. This is peace. But since you guys hate this, I'll just do this. And that way everyone can understand it. But I really appreciate all of you. Peace out.